Hello, everyone, in my human behavior class. Um, I am going to do a chapter overview for chapter 5. Um, this is one of my favorite chapters, I will admit. If I could do or if I could teach a social work cultures class or cultures perspective and social work or whatever the case may be, I would do it in a heartbeat. I would smash that class because racism, colorism, discrimination, all that good stuff is something that I'm truly passionate about. But anyway, excuse me. So chapter 5. Chapter 5, it talks about race, racism, and colorism. It states that race refers to biological differences among groups of people. It started off, or when race was first developed, when the term was first coined, if you will, it was about blood lineage, and then it turned into the differences among people based on skin color and physical characteristics. And I want to say present day, we lean on the second definition, which is the differences among people based on skin and physical characteristics. Racism involves stereotyping people based on their race, which is their color and their physical characteristics. It Racism refers to sociological and other ideological processes that promote different treatment of race and ethnic groups. So, excuse me. So, racism involves stereotyping people based on their race, which is their skin color and their physical characteristics. Within race, we have four subcategories, which is individual racism, institutional racism, culture racism, and environmental racism. And within racism, there's also colorism, which happens within a minority group. Colorism basically is the lighter the skin complexion, the superior the person is within that culture. So let me give you some examples. So within the African American community or within Black folks, historically there was this thing called the brown paper bag test. Okay. So what is the brown paper bag test? The brown paper bag test basically was that if an African American was lighter than a brown paper bag, then they would have the jobs that was in the forefront. So that meant that they could be elevator operators, they could be stockers, they could be greeters. Those individuals did not have to work in the kitchen, work in the yards, work in spaces where they were not associating with the public. So the brown paper bag test stated that if you were lighter than this brown paper bag, then you'd be able to have the good jobs, pretty much. And if you were darker than the brown paper bag, then you would have to have the not so good jobs. Like I stated before, you would be gathering trash, you would work in the kitchens, etc. And they would literally hold a brown paper bag to an African American skin tone and make that decision. People also use that for housemaid jobs and nanny jobs. They wanted their workers to have a certain complexion. So with colorism again means that the lighter the complexion within the community, the more superior you were. So that meant that lighter skinned African Americans felt as though they were superior than darker African Americans. There's a saying, and it just slipped my mind, and hopefully I'll be able to remember it before I terminate this video. But there are all sorts of sayings. Basically, the brighter you were, the more powerful you were within your community. So mixed race kids were popular. Mixed race or lighter toned individuals, those were the ones that had the eliteness within the community. Now, understand this, that just wasn't within African American cultures. That happens in Hispanic cultures, from my understanding. It also happens with Haitians and Dominicans. So, the Dominicans and the Haitians share an island. Well, if you didn't know, now you know. And so basically that island is cut in half. One side is the Dominican Republic and the other side is Haiti. So when Haiti, the history of Haiti is that it was once a very prosperous country. It gained its independence from the Queen and became very prosperous. But then individuals, hated against Haiti because what black country could be this rich, and then things happened and then it became not so rich. So a lot of the migrant workers from Haiti would go over to the Dominican Republic to work. And so, there were even news articles about this, like the last couple of years, where they were talking about how these darker individuals, these darker complexion Haitians or these darker complected Dominicans would be killed in the street with hatchets because they were the inferior race within that, within that society. So they most definitely deported any Haitians that had came through and did not have a work pass. But then even if you did have a work pass, you would still be able to be discriminated against and even killed within the Dominican Republic. And it was based off of colorism. You have individuals who will say, like, there's a thing right now within my culture or within the African American or the African community about lighter Dominicans stating that they are not they have no African lineage. But if you ever look or study about the transatlantic slave trade, them boats went down to Cuba. Them boats went down to the Dominican area. That's where we got our sugar cane from. So there were slaves down there. And so they are trying to, deny those African roots. And we're like, why would you deny them? So I can, jump in even deeper with it, but that's the point when it comes to colorism. The lighter the skin complexion, the more superior that individual has within their community. But when we talk about racism, especially the 4 subcategories of racism, one of the things that I think that most definitely is important within the 4 is the institutional racism and the environmental racism, especially when it comes to the non-white communities. I know within my community, there are more fast food restaurants. There are more liquor stores within my community, a poor community, or a community that I was raised in, versus the non-white communities that I would go into for schooling. So I guess to make that a little bit more clear, because I feel like I'm rambling. So when I was in elementary school, or when I was in elementary through high school, I was a part of the desegregation program here in St. Louis. So what does that mean? That means that basically poor black kids got bused to rich white schools. That's layman terms, that's what it meant. And we called it the deseg program. So I was able to get an excellent education. No shade to my school district. It was excellent. Even to this day, it's ranked in the top 5 within Missouri, the school district, and it's in the top 50 of the nation. So that school system was very It held a lot of weight, and it still does hold a lot of weight. But it was a distinct difference between that community that I was bussed into in my own community. Again, we have more fast food places, we have more liquor stores. Within that community that I was bussed into, it did not have those things. It had healthy grocery stores, and when you go into those grocery stores, they had fresh fruit. They had fresh produce. They had fresher options than what was in my community grocery stores. They didn't have the McDonald's, the White Castles, and the Churches and the Lee's Chicken. They didn't have that. They had like full, for real restaurants. They didn't even have liquor stores. They, to this day, they don't have a liquor store. You go into your local grocery store and you buy your alcohol and your booze. And so people think, or the assumption is that you have these things within these communities to help deteriorate or destroy the individuals within those communities. Let's look at the Native Americans, the indigenous people of this land. These are the people who own the U.S. Was the Native Americans and the Spanish. Let's be real. If you look at them now, we've stolen Texas, New Mexico, California, in all of that Southwest region. It's now the United States instead of the Spanish. It was a whole war about it. Our indigenous people live in areas, and if you go into these areas, they are blighted. They're blighted communities. They have a lot of casinos. Alcoholism, drugism is a real big problem. So think about that and take that into consideration when you think about environmental racism. Like, why do they have those problems when this was their land in the first place? Why do they suffer with inappropriate, or not even inappropriate is not the word, but failed educational systems? Right now, there is a big thing about indigenous women being captured and placed in the sex trade. There's a big thing about it, but you never hear it if you listen to the news. But it's big right now. Why isn't it as big as when this little 13-year-old girl who got captured by a family friend and held for like 90 days? Can't think of this chick's name. Why is one culture more publicized than the other? Institutional racism. Institutional racism is also a big thing. And it hinders not just people of color, but also gender, women, also individuals who may identify as gay, lesbian, transgender, etc. Why do we have men? So Viagra is pretty much free when it comes to insurance companies, right? Like you can go get Viagra for low cost, but why can't our menstrual products be free? It wasn't until recently that most birth control became free with insurance. Why is it? Because men, and not no shades of men, but white men are still running things. And there's still a proverbial glass ceiling when it comes to some industries. Sexism is real. So within the 4 subcategories of racism, in my opinion, environmental racism has a huge impact and institutional racism has a huge impact. So most definitely get to know those four categories of those 4 subcategories of racism. On page 146, we talk about discrimination. Discrimination is the prejudgment and negative treatment of people based on identifiable characteristics such as race, gender, religion, and ethnicity. when I read this, or when I think about this, the first thing that comes to mind is the Holocaust. Jewish people were discriminated against. Hitler was like, those Jews over there are the devil. Thus, I'm going to wipe that population out. Genocide. When I think about genocide, I also think about the Tutsis, the Hutus, and the Tutsis in Rwanda, where one group within less than 30 days almost wiped out their neighbor. Crazy. Based off of an ethnicity. Prejudice on page 146. I'm sorry, my dog is up underneath me. Prejudice on page 146. More of cognitive is prejudice. Prejudice is more of a cognitive process than a behavioral one. So it talks about the attitudes, the beliefs, and the stereotypes that a person holds about others. Making a judgment about people or a person based on a preconceived idea about the characteristic of that person or of that group. So I have an unpopular opinion, right? I believe that everyone has their own prejudice. Everyone is prejudiced. Everyone is prejudiced. We all have had a preconceived notion about another group or another person, and for whatever reason, we dislike that person or that group until we got to know them, and then we was like, oh, they ain't that bad. So my unpopular opinion is that we're all prejudiced. Because again, it's more of a cognitive concept. It's more of a thought. It's not necessarily an action, but more of a thought. So on page 149, it talks about religion, and it also talks about history. So because of our history, we can be prejudiced, and because of our religion, we can be prejudiced. So when it comes to religion, the first thing that comes to mind is when Africans were brought over during the transatlantic slave trade. And so they wanted all Africans to be converted into Christians, because they felt that the gods that the Africans worshipped were inferior. So they indoctrinated them into Christianity because they felt that you know what I'm trying to say, was the thing to do. It was the right religion. When I think about prejudice, I also think about the historical implications of oppression. How historically we could be prejudiced. Historically, the white male is the first thing that comes to my mind is the creme de la creme. That the white male is the most popular, is the most powerful, supposedly the most popular and powerful individual when it compared to other races. And think about it. When it comes to police, right? And this is just a thought and an example that comes to my mind. If you have a white man and a black man standing next to each other and a police officer walks up to them without asking any questions, who do you think the police officer is going to arrest first? I put my money on the black man. He's going to arrest the black man first. It's been proven. It's been shown. It's been shown how you can YouTube it. You can get on the news, on the internet, whatever, and see how we've had these mass shootings by some white men and they are captured alive. The Dylan, I think that guy's name was Dylan something, who shot up the historical church in Charleston. When they captured him alive, they took him to Burger King and got him a burger, and then took him to jail because the kid was hungry. When have they ever captured anybody of minority, black or brown, alive and then taken them to get something to eat before they took them to jail? the man who was, I'm not going to even jump down that rabbit hole, but it's countless stories of where black and brown people have been doing things that were not a crime and have been killed. It's been recorded, and nothing has happened to those police officers. And they were not doing anything illegal. But I'm not going to go into that. So, I'm going to segue that into privilege. So privilege is the advantage that the dominant group in society has. So an example of privilege could be white privilege. Another example of privilege is anyone that's in this class has privilege. Why do they have privilege? Well, because you are able to obtain an education that someone in your group, your culture group, may not be able to. Prime example. So my household, right, in my neighborhood, historically growing up, I mean, we have historical families here. My family has lived in this particular house for 3 generations. 2, 1. Yes, for 3 generations. And so the next door neighbors, the same. And then we have some neighbors up the street, the same, right? So me, the Smiths in my house, and then the Johnsons. I have privilege because I was raised with 2 parents, my mother and my father. The Johnsons were not. They were raised by their uncle. I have privilege because I was able to go to college. The Johnsons were not. I have privilege because my family is upper middle class. The Johnsons are not. So even within my community, or even within a community, there could be privilege. I have privilege because my parents had books. We were always taught to read. We were taught our history. Our history was pounded in us. Just to give you an example, we had an African encyclopedia, African American history encyclopedia, and in an African that talked about, the transatlantic slave trade and all that, encyclopedia. We had posters on the wall of kings and queens. My parents taught us that we were descendants of kings and queens. Our parents in this house taught us that education and traveling was important. So even though we didn't have a lot, we were able to travel. The Johnsons were not. In the summer, I was going to camp. I was climbing trees, jumping off mountains, rappelling, boating, building campfires, sleeping under the stars. The Johnsons didn't do any of that. So I had privilege. My parents showed me something other than what was directly in front of me. And that's still privilege. The book goes on page 149 and talks about social learning theory. So the thing about the social learning theory is that people are socialized to think and behave in certain ways. So the first thing that I think about is children are not born racist. Racism and bigotry are taught. As a baby, you don't pop out and say, I don't like white people. I don't like Indians. I don't like Asians. Those are things that are taught. So social learning is people being socialized to think and behave in a certain way. And again, I relate that to children are not born racist. On page 148, we have the attribution theory, how people perceive and make judgments about others. Attributions are the inferences people make about their own and other people's behavior. Then we go on to page 150 when we talk about oppression. Oppression is the social act of placing severe restrictions on individuals, groups, or institutions. People living under oppressive conditions usually have a deep understanding of these processes because they encounter them daily. And then they have subcategories of oppression, which is primary, secondary, and I'm sorry, my dogs are up. Tertiary oppression. So the thing that I think about oppression is before the Civil Rights Act, right? Everyone was divided into their own community. We had black people over here, we had Jews over here, we had Italians over here, etc. So in my mind, I think about St. Louis. St. Louis is a very segregated city, almost like Chicago, which is even more segregated. And so here within St. Louis, you know, African Americans or black folks stayed on one side of the city, Italians stayed on the hill. We had our Jewish people stay in Clayton or in the county. And then we had our poorer white people stay down south, and no one came out of their community. But then when we started to mix communities, like present day, you still see a little bit of oppression within the African. So they're doing this thing where they are rebuilding the city of St. Louis, and they've been doing this for a while now, right? So when you go, there's a city divide. There is a street called Delmar that pretty much runs down the city, right? It kind of separates the city. So on one side of Delmar, where the black folks stay, it's pretty run down. We have a lot of abandoned houses. There's a lot of liquor stores. There's a lot of fried chicken places, etc. But then on the other side of Delmar, where they've put the money and spent the money, it's not like that. It's a completely different world. But black folks don't stay on that other side, or brown people really, or black and brown people really don't stay on that other side. And that oppression goes also to, some of our Indian reservations. They don't have some of the high quality things that other communities have. I think that's a sign of oppression. So then we talk about microaggression. Microaggression I started to hear the term a lot recently. Microaggression. So microaggression is the intentional or the unintentional derogatory insult and slight that are communicated verbally, behaviorally, or through an environment, or through the environment to people of a target group. Microaggression. So stop temper. So when I think of microaggression, I think of my neighbor. My neighbor is transgender. She was born a male, but decided to become a female because she felt as though that suited her more. And we'll get into my neighbor. I love my neighbor, but we'll get more into her story later in the semester. So microaggression is calling her a him. Hey, dude. But clearly, she is dressed in a feminine fashion. Her nails are always slayed to the gods. She is always slayed to the gods. So microaggression is calling someone who has asked you to refer to her as a her, but ignoring that and calling her a him. Microaggression can also be, I have a colleague that I went to Howard with, and he is homosexual. He's gay. And I have heard people ask him and his significant other, well, who's the top and who's the bottom? Who the female of this relationship? That's microaggression in my eyes. Who cares? That ain't your business. Or are you just trying to disrespect them? On a more personal level, microaggression is when I'm talking to a group of people who know me and I tell them about a situation, the first thing someone says is, well, what you do now, Ingrid? Well, why do I always have to do something? Why can't I be the victim? Microaggression. On page 155, we talk about social justice. All humans have a right to live a fulfilling life, which requires, all humans have a right to live fulfilling lives, which requires access to appropriate resources, decision-making opportunities, and freedom from fear of prosecution. So social justice is aiming for that, making sure that everyone has that right to live to have appropriate resources, decision-making opportunities, and the freedom without fear of persecution. And that as social workers or people who work with people, that is one of our duties in our job is to be a part of change, which is social justice. Excuse me. On page 159, they talk about social action, the efforts to modify societal institutions to meet the needs, resolve issues, achieve social and economic justice, and provide for the well-being of society's members. Coordinating activities. So when I think about social actions or social action, I think of like the March on Washington. I think about voter registration. I think about in the summertime when their kids are being fed lunch and breakfast because school is out. Social action is protesting. Social action is campaigning, making something right that is not right for a group of people, and to resolve whatever issue that is not right. On page 159, they talk about advocacy. Their definition of advocacy is representing or defending the rights of a client or those who lack skills or resources to represent themselves. So we've been talking about advocacy for the last couple of days. So I'm not going to dive into that. So within the rest of the chapter, they talk about contemporary social action perspectives, political opportunity perspectives, mobilizing structures and perspectives, culture framing perspectives, understand what all that is, community organizations theory, understand what that is, and community and social work practice, which is like the social planning model, social action model, and then etc. So this is what I have to say about this chapter. And this may be getting a little bit off topic, right? As a social worker, we have to check our opinions, our values, our beliefs at the door when we are helping people. So if you are super religious, you should not be putting your religious aspects or pushing your religious aspects upon a client. If you if you have something against, or if you do not believe in homosexuality, that is just your belief. It should not impact you or make you not want to work with someone that is homosexual. That ain't got nothing to do with you. As social workers, as people who are working with the community, we are there to advocate for our clients. Advocating for our clients and helping our clients does not mean that I'm going to help you as long as you agree with me. Y'all got to check some of that at the door. Also, as a social worker, we need to understand our privilege or our lack thereof, right? I had taught this class last semester, and I had a student who had an issue with privilege. This student could not understand how she had or how she could be considered having privilege just because she was white. She could not understand how she had privilege. And I tried to explain it to her. I tried to explain to her that if she was pit against a person, a minority, whether that minority be brown, blue, gray, whatever, whether that minority be gay, lesbian, or transgender, handicapped, or whatever, her being a white female would probably be picked before anyone else. That's privilege. It doesn't matter that she was poor. It doesn't matter that she grew up in rural America and that she had some difficulties in her life. Her privilege came because she was a white female. Her privilege came because her complexion is the dominant within this society, within America. So we need to understand our privilege. We need to understand how we, regardless if we are black, brown, or whatever, could be treated differently from someone else and why that may be. We should also be sympathetic and empathetic when listening to other people's story. So when they talked about oppression, they stated that people living under oppressive conditions usually have a deep understanding of the process because they encounter it daily. So when someone is telling you about their oppression, when someone is telling you about, you know, the things that go on in their community or the things that happen to them because of whatever, it is not your place to say, that don't happen. It doesn't happen to me, so it don't happen to you. You don't know that. We are supposed to be, as helpers, we are supposed to listen and understand that person's perspective. So I'll take it even further. So I've had a lot of people recently ask me why, what is, or it's basically what is, like, what is one of the best characteristics of you as a social worker? And I tell them that it's because I'm relatable. And I strive and I've worked really hard to be relatable to my clients, regardless of who they are, whether if they're old, if they're rich, if they're poor, if they're whatever. I try to be relatable to them. I try to meet them where they are at. I said, I don't judge people. I may say what they've done is stupid, but I'm not judging them saying, oh, you know, you stupid because. No. I just have an opinion. That wasn't the right thing to do. That was a stupid idea. But I'm not saying you were stupid for that idea. I don't judge people. And because I don't judge people and I meet people where they are and I talk to people as though they are human beings and I talk to them in a level and in a way in which they understand, it makes me relatable and it makes me have a better relationship with my client. I think Smoke wants to say hi. Hi, Smoke. Say hi. Now get down. And because of that, I'm relatable. And I think that's one of the best qualities that I have. If anyone has ever had a conversation with me, I think only one student in this class has actually had a conversation with me. And they know that I listen. I understand. I try to understand a person's perspective and I don't judge them. And so I'm saying all this to say, and I feel like I'm rambling, and if I am, I apologize. Let's take us and our personal opinion out of our work. Let's take our ideologies and our belief systems out of our work. And let's start meeting the client where they are and accepting them for their beliefs and not downgrading their history or their story. You wouldn't want anyone to tell you that the death of your mother, husband, child shouldn't impact you the way it did because it's only a death and people die, right? That's insensitive. So why would you do that to a client? And I've seen people do this to their client, and I think it's crazy. Yeah. I think that's all I got. I feel like I rambled a lot, and this is most definitely probably, I hope I represented this information in the best way I could, given the fact that I'm not feeling well. So I'm not so passionate, but I am passionate. But anyway, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, most definitely hit me up. Temper wants to say hi now. Say hi, Temper. Say hi. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, most definitely hit me up. You can text me, or you can put it in the coffee shop, or email me, and I'll eventually get to it. All right, y'all. Bye.